Hey, toy fans and Masters of the Universe fans, I'm here today to talk about toy collecting, and specifically, we're going to talk about collecting Masters of the Universe Classics figures, and how much we all love this line. Well, the question that I get a lot in the comments and in feedback is, why couldn't this line continue? Why did this line have to kind of go away? It went away maybe about a year and a half ago. After almost 10 years of doing figures and castles and dragons and all of that. I was the brand manager for about 9.5 years of it. And Mattel is doing a new awesome He-Man line called MOTUC Origins. But the question is, could they have continued to do classics? Or not necessarily Mattel, I mean Super 7 as well. Could classics and Origins coexist? Could classics still keep going? Now, I'm going to be doing a video eventually about what happened to Matty Collector after I left, but that's not what this video is about. This video is specifically looking at MOTUC Classics, and not necessarily, well, some of it will be the plans that I had in place, or I had put forth before I left, but some of it will be about ways to keep the line going. Just really my thoughts as brand manager for 9.5 years. If it was going to keep going, what are some avenues? And what Super 7 did with the line when they took it over really was similar to the plans that I kind of had in place, was the idea of doing a focus on the A-list characters. Not necessarily plussed up the way they did the Ultimates. They were at a higher price point because they came with more accessories and every head and every accessory that the figure ever came with. That was, 100% that was a cool idea, and that was them. It was more just about the focus on A-list characters. That was really where the plans were, and that was the way to keep MOTUC Classics going. Another great thing Super 7 did was the packaging refresh. This was also something that was heavily talked about. I don't know if it was developed by Super 7 like on his own, or if they just looked at the plans we had, as well as articulation. That was another thing, was adding more articulation into the figures, was another thought to essentially keep the figures refreshed. And that really is the key idea, was how do you refresh the line without having to rely on really, really obscure characters? Because there's only so many times you can sell an obscure character, but the A-list figures, if done correctly, you can sell over and over and over again. And that truly is the key to keeping a line going well over 10 years. Eventually you're going to run out of obscure characters. Even in 2012, which was kind of the last year before we rejiggered the roadmap, we knew that there was an end in sight, that we were running out of characters. Now, I'm not saying there's a lack of characters in the MOTUC brand. I mean, there are literally thousands of characters that could be done. But really, truly, how many could you sell at a $25 to $30 price point? That's really what you have to talk about. There's some characters that you just can't sell. The other thing is, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When you're launching a new scale, much like Kenner did in the early 80s. They came out with the Micro Collection, and this was meant to keep Star Wars going in the long term. They found a way of taking a successful brand and putting out a new scale. But this didn't really have the effect they wanted. A lot of people looked at this new scale and said, well, wait a minute, I already own Star Wars at kind of a definitive scale, which in this case is 3 3/4. You're looking at a set that actually wasn't released. It was planned in the next wave. And that's a perfect example of the longevity of their plans. They thought that Micro was going to be the new scale. But parents, and these are not 80s parents, sorry, should have used an 80s parents image, were like, well, wait a minute, we already spent all this money on 3 3/4, ships and vehicles and playsets. We don't want to spend all this money on an all-new scale when we've already essentially invested in 3 3/4. Our kids own 3 3/4. They love 3 3/4. We don't need a new scale to start collecting Star Wars again at day zero. That's what I meant by don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, can you imagine if they pulled 3 3/4 from store shelves? I mean, kids would have been like, yeah, I am not happy about that. I have all these 3 3/4 figures, and now you're replacing them with these little micro figures. That is not what I want. And that was kind of what happened. So that was the reaction to the micro line and why it went away very quickly. Fast forward to today with the modern collector, well, with an adult, obviously multiple scales are a whole different story. You can collect brands in multiple scales. Some people collect by character. In fact, this is my Shazam Captain Marvel collection, and I'll buy him at any scale, at any look. Same with, let's look at Darth Vader. How many Darth Vader action figures are there at 3 3/4? A ton. He's not a one-and-done character, and neither is He-Man. Doing multiple scales is completely fine, but do you want to, if you will, walk away from the scale that performs the best? And the key is refreshing that scale. So again, what Super 7 did with adding all of these different heads, that's a great way to refresh He-Man, is to have him come with a different head. Another way, and I have a whole video about the 2000X line, was the idea of doing 6-inch scale figures, but in 2000X style, meaning actually giving them the bodies. So like Beastman, making him bigger, Buzz-Off, making him skinnier. So, you can see here, just throwing a 2000X head on a Classics Buzz-Off wasn't going to quite give you a 2000X Buzz-Off. So a way to keep 6-inch going could have been to do, as I talked about in the other video, a true 2000X line in 6-inch scale. The original 2000X was in 5-inch. And again, that's a great way to keep 6-inch going even when introducing new scales. You can always introduce new scales for the adult collector, but when you have them, if you will, hooked and invested in a specific scale, in this case 6-inch, tossing it out, when you've already got people so emotionally invested, here again, Filmation. That was basically our first attempt at that. Was we could redo the A-list characters in the Filmation look, and that brings it back to my original point. The A-list characters don't need, in any toy line, to be one and done. You can do them, especially when you're like 10 years apart. You're not going to redo Plunder over and over and over again. But you can redo He-Man, you can redo Teela, you can redo Man-at-Arms, and Skeletor, and Beastman, and find new exciting ways, whether through heads, packaging, articulation. There's always going to be people late to the game who are coming into the line and have missed those original releases that are now going for a lot on the secondary market. So by refreshing the main characters, that's essentially a way to keep the line going. I do love what Super 7 did, but I think instead of doing the plussed up figure with everything, I might have just thought about trying to keep that price point down and do, again, new heads, new articulation, new, slightly different armor, that kind of thing. Could we have kept it going forever and ever? The whole idea of, all toy lines must end, there actually is a whole story behind that, and that really was leading into the Filmation and 2000X 6-inch lines. The idea that it didn't mean Classics was over forever, but it meant that introducing new styles for 6-inch was a way to keep it going. And I'm going to get into that. I got a whole video about that. Once I hit 1,000 subscribers, I will do a deep dive into the actual plans we had and kind of what happened after I left with Maddie Collector. So if you like this channel, subscribe, and we'll unlock that video content. See you around the internet.